Old powers waken, shadows stir. An age of wonder and terror will soon be upon us. An age for gods and heroes.
The glass candles are burning, and you're listening to the Obsidian Nights podcast. And we're back with another episode of Obsidian Nights. So quick update before I jump into the juice. I've decided to have rotating guests on the podcast, and the only requirement is that you love A Song of Ice and Fire. You don't need a channel, you don't need a blog, you don't need a podcast. If you want to be featured on an episode of Obsidian Nights, just go to my Twitter at @thisgrayarea and send me a direct message and I'll see what I can do. Also, real quick, Quinn's graphic novel, Tadia, has launched for pre-sale on Indiegogo, and it's amazing. You can get the digital copy for as cheap as $10. If you would like to support him, then go to the link in the description. He has a lot of perks over there. You can't beat it. Also, Obsidian Nights, I know this is coming out on Monday, but Obsidian Nights will be coming out every Wednesday. If you love it and are listening on Apple, please leave me a review and let me know how I'm doing. So, we're back in Winterfell, and today, joining me for one of the most pivotal chapters is my good friend, Joe Magician.
Hey, how's it going?
It's going good. How are you doing over there? You want to let the people know who you are, where they can find you before we jump into this?
I was going to say, you're saying, you don't need to have a blog and a podcast and a channel, but I have all those things, Gray. I have them all.
Yeah, a lot of people that are coming on have all those things.
Yeah, you can find me on my YouTube channel, youtube.com/Joe Magician. You can find me on my blog at joemagician.wordpress.com. You can find me on the podcast feed because I tend to do these real long streams every Saturday ever since the quarantine stuff happened. Those get posted on the podcast feed. The Wit and Wisdom of Joe Magician, you can find it anywhere you want in case you don't want to sit down and watch a 2-hour YouTube video, basically.
So today we will be doing Bran 2. So it's Bran 2 in A Game of Thrones. So we're in Winterfell. And the king's party has went hunting. So Robert and Joffrey and Ned and Robb, Tyrion and Theon, Uncle Benjen, basically everyone but the girls, the bastard, and those that are too young to go. So I think it's interesting that this chapter opens with the king wanted wild boar at the feast tonight.
George is laying that one on thick for a little bit, wasn't he?
All right, so I was wondering, so we can say this is foreshadowing because it's easy in hindsight to say, well, yeah, the king loves boar. He wants boar to eat, and the boar killed him eventually. But also, is everything foreshadowing? What do you think? Is it a coincidence or is it foreshadowing?
Oh, no, it's definitely foreshadowing. And it's even, one boar actually kills him, but it's this one that sets him up to be killed because obviously we get to the point where Bran's left behind. He's bored. So what does he do? He goes climbing. He discovers the dark secret between Cersei and Jaime. This boars, for some reason, are coming for Robert Baratheon. They want him dead.
Yes.
Even, it's like boar machinations behind the scenes. We got to take out this Robert Baratheon guy. We're going to hit him where he lives first. We're going to hit him with Jaime and Cersei. Then we're going to come and get him later.
Oh, yeah, that's okay. So I never thought of that. So, yeah, that boar led Robert away from Winterfell, and he took everyone with him, and that put Bran in a position to be pushed out of a window, and a whole crazy whirlwind of events have started to happen.
All because Robert wanted boar. Twice he wanted boar, and both times it basically got him killed.
A Song of Ice and Fire would have been so much better, if Robert was just allergic to boar. Or he just didn't have a taste for it. Maybe he wanted venison instead.
Well, it would be nice if, none of these bad things happen, but then would we have anything to read?
Yeah. No, we wouldn't.
It's who wants to read about, the calm, peaceful times of Westeros? You can just go read history. We want the high drama.
I mean, I thought about that like the other day. Like I was thinking like, dang, did Ned Stark really have to die? And I'm like, yes, like that's the point of the whole story. Like he has to bite it or there's no story.
Just things have to happen for there to be something to read. That's how it goes.
Definitely.
It hurts. It hurts. It definitely hurts, especially when it's your favorite characters or it's something that's particularly tough to read, but it's like no story without them.
There would be no story without Ned, but there would be no story without Bran, without Robert going after that boar and Bran climbing these walls of Winterfell. So Bran 2 in A Game of Thrones, to me, it's a pretty heavy chapter. Bran is basically saying goodbye to like the only thing that he's ever known, and that's Winterfell. So when he found out that he would be joining his father in King's Landing, he was excited. Like he couldn't wait to ride down the King's Road alongside his father and sleep in the red castle that the Dragon Lords built. He recalls the story of the knights from the song, many that are heroes to Bran. But then today, like in this chapter, right now, today is his final goodbye. And they're going to leave tomorrow. And Bran feels lost. He's totally lost. Bran had been marking the days on his wall, eager to depart, to see a whole world he had only dreamed of, and begin a life he could scarcely imagine. Yet now, the last day was at hand. Suddenly, Bran felt lost. Winterfell had been the only home he had ever known. His father had told him that he ought to say his farewells today, and he had tried. After the hunt had ridden out, he wandered through the castle with his wolf at his side, intending to visit the ones who would be left behind. Old Nan and Gage the cook, Micken in his smithy, Hodor the stable boy who smiled so much and took care of his pony and never said anything but Hodor, the man in the glass gardens who gave him a blackberry when he came to visit, but it was no good. He had gone to the stables first and seen his pony there in its stall, except it wasn't his pony anymore. He was getting a real horse and leaving the pony behind, and all of a sudden, Bran just wanted to sit down and cry. He turned and ran off before Hodor and the other stable boys could see the tears in his eyes. That was the end of his farewells. Whew, there's a lot to unpack there, right?
It's definitely very heavy on Bran's part, and it's a lot of questions swirling in his head about what does he like. He's at 7 years old, grappling with what does he want his life to be about, and that's the primary thing that's going on here. Where he's a Stark of Winterfell, he's Ned Stark's son, he's a Northerner, but then there's also the side of him that wants to go south and be a knight and be on the Kingsguard. Well, he can't be both.
Yeah,
like. To go south is to abandon his northern heritage. To stay in the north is to give up these grand ambitions that he has. And he's also, I don't know if you picked this up, he's very ambitious, extremely ambitious in this chapter. Because he talks about how he wants to be a knight, but he doesn't want to be any knight. He wants to be Barristan the Bold. He wants to be Ryan Redwine. He wants to be Arthur Dayne. He wants to be famous He wants to be famous across the entire kingdom, and he wants to be known for being excellent, and like he wants to be the very best, like no one ever was. He's like a little Ash Ketchum. And it's interesting thinking about like when you think about Bran and how he sort of goes where Bloodraven tells him the rest of the books. Here, he's like, I have this whole big plan. I'm going to be the greatest kid that Westeros has ever seen, especially because he doesn't even really know what a knight is.
Yeah.
He has no real conception other than these guys are famous and respected.
Yeah, just what he hears in the stories. And he kind of gets like a reality check because Jaime Lannister comes with the king's party to Winterfell. So Bran is like met him, and Rob's all like, you know, he shouldn't really count as a knight because he killed the old king. And he's met Sir Meryn.
Meryn and Boros, yeah.
Yeah, Sir Meryn and Boros. So, like, you know, he's getting the actual real feel, which I feel like a lot of these chapters with the Stark children early on, especially Bran and Jon, they have this like idea of what the world is and what it should be like, because they all listen to the songs and the stories. And I know Sansa gets a lot of like flack as being like this, she's all stuck in the stories and the songs, and she's so foolish. But all of them were like, all of their chapter, like all of them were.
Yeah, they all want to be like heroes, like their father Ned, who led a rebellion, and his best friend Robert, who's now king. It's like they're being graded on this incredible curve, and they're all turning to like these legendary and mythological figures in order to be like, well, how can I like shine in this world when your father is Ned Stark and his best friend is Robert Baratheon? Like, you have to do incredible things to be even noticed.
Yeah. Totally. Yeah, like, so I wanted to touch on Bran's age for a second. So, Bran is 7. And to me, I think he's a lot wiser than a 7-year-old. I don't think he acts 7. Like he's about to go on this journey, like this dream journey. He's been dreaming about adventure and setting out into the unknown. He has a curious mind. And then the day before he's set to leave, at 7 years old, like, he realizes what he's giving up. And I don't know if I had that brain capacity at 7 to, like, have my adventurous dream dangled in front of me, and then the day before I leave just be in utter despair, because at 7, I would realize the concept of home. And like, he doesn't mention his mother or Rob or Rickon. It's Winterfell. Like, it's home. Old Nan, Gage the cook, Mick Hodor, his pony, the man who gave him the blackberry. Like, they make Winterfell. They make home. They have been his childhood. And at 7, he's saying goodbye to his childhood and becoming a man. And we talked about this earlier in Catelyn 1, like how in this world you have to grow up faster. Like, Rickon is 3. And Eddard is telling Catelyn, like, he can't be a boy forever, like he's 3. And I guess Ned feels some kind of way because he's afraid of his direwolf. So, yeah. I mean, it like, you have to grow up faster in this world. But I feel like Bran having, like, the emotional, mental capacity to realize all of what's going on in, like, right in this moment, I think it says a lot about who Bran is and what Winterfell is to all of the Starks.
Yeah, for sure. It's definitely setting him up in the sense to be like, wow, Bran seems to be an exceptional person. I mean, that comes across in this chapter too, especially with like his climbing and his dexterity and how he has like these abilities that nobody else has, even before we know he's a warg. But this is also sort of telling on George a little bit. He's said in the past that writing children is extremely hard for him. And that's one of the main reasons he wanted to introduce the 5-year gap. If your audience doesn't know what that is, after A Storm of Swords, he was going to introduce a 5-year gap in the narrative to give his characters time to age up. A large reason because he's not good at writing kids. He tends to write them older than they should be. Now, he makes it work. He backfills it, like you're saying, and with his destiny and his powers and where he's going, it does work, but it's also a side effect of, yeah, George isn't that great at writing them.
At writing kids?
He writes them, yeah, he writes them like, I don't know if you've ever read like Ender's Game or something like that. He writes them all as almost adults when, like you were saying, I remember when I was 7, I would have no conception of these things. I would be doing what Bran was doing in this chapter and being like, oh, Barristan the Bold? I'm going to get him to sign my baseball card. That would have been me.
Well, I think that, Bran is kind of established as a wiser child, like the wise one amongst the Starks. But I do think that there is something going on with, Winterfell, like the importance of Winterfell to the Starks, because in later chapters, like Arya, when she's in Braavos at the House of Black and White and the magic candles, they make her remember the smells of Winterfell, and when she refuses to give up Needle, it's because she knows what Needle means to her, and it's not necessarily a person, but it's Winterfell and all of the people in Winterfell, like old Nan stories and summer snows and the Hartree and the smell of the glass gardens and all of that stuff. And I think it's like the Starks are Winterfell and Winterfell is the Starks. And I definitely think, like, in the long run, Winterfell is going to come into play, like, massively, like in Winds of Winter. There's going to be something huge that goes down at Winterfell with the Starks.
Somehow in the dark, I'm guessing. Maybe nobody in the page will be able to see it either, because we'll, the broadcast. The long night.
Some long nighty stuff.
It'll just be blank pages if I can't see anything, what's going on. But, yeah, I think that's exactly right. And I also find it interesting the way that Bran relates to Winterfell, because it's very unique and it's called out specifically in the chapter. Like, you're talking about Arya misses the people and all these other small parts, but what Bran really misses is what the main part of this chapter is the climbing and his feeling that he has a unique and personal connection with the castle and the landscape and, like, the animals and the people in a way that no one else does, because he mentions throughout the chapter that he really enjoys being invisible. He enjoys being up on the roofs and running and finding secret passages nobody knows about. And it's interesting that that's his relationship to Winterfell. Like you said, he wanted to go say goodbye to all those people. He then skipped that and then went climbing and then said goodbye to birds and said goodbye to the broken tower. And it's so unusual, especially when you go back and you read some of the language that's going into it. Like, for instance, Bran tells a story in this one about how he got punished for climbing, and they found him all the way up a tree at the very top sleeping. Weird, George. I wonder what that means. But also Ned calls him a squirrel, and in this chapter we get the famous line where he compares Winterfell to a large stone tree, or a weirwood, basically. And it's setting up very early on that Bran's relationship to his home and the North, Winterfell itself, the old gods, is separate and apart from all the rest of his siblings. Like, there's specifically a line, too, where he says, I know Winterfell in a way that Robb never will. And I think that's very important to set up in this chapter going forwards, that Bran is part of the pack, but he's apart. He has his own way of dealing with his heritage and how his identity and how these things are, like, mixed up in his head. Like, you can't be the Avatar of the North and also a Knight of the Faith of the Seven. You can't be a Kingsguard and also like a Northerner. Like, those things don't work. It's also the dichotomy that George has built into him, these competing forces, that makes him so interesting to think about.
Yeah, no, when you said, that he connects with the castle itself, it reminded me of, because while I'm doing my reread, I'm looking for all the King Bran shit.
Yeah, big King Bran shit here.
Yeah, and there was a theory, the Fisher King theory. And I feel like that kind of amps up that theory a little bit.
So the Fisher King theory is an Arthurian legend where essentially this Fisher King figure who was injured, usually has some kind of leg wound. Hey, look, Bran also has some sort of leg wound. He's part of the Holy Grail quest. And at the end of the Grail quest, it ends up with him becoming the magical ruler restored to power, basically. Sounds familiar.
Right. The way I interpreted the Fisher King theory was that Bran would remain in Winterfell. And that would become the new ruling seat. Like, the land thrives because the rightful king is on the throne, kind of thing. So I would think that because he has this relation to Winterfell that he talks about in this chapter, and that is really beefed up in this chapter, I think that is some King Bran foreshadowing for sure.
Yeah, like, if he ends up the king in the Red Keep, I mean, that would just make sense, like, historical wise, but you would think where an old god ruler would be either Winterfell or, like, on the God's Eye or something like that. That seems...
Yeah, like the Isle of Faces.
But also the connection to the castle goes deeper than that, where it's very nature focused, where he runs through the woods and he climbs high as he can. He's basically like acting like a bird. He's interacting with the birds. This is the first signs that there's a relationship between the direwolves and the kids, as Bran says that he feels like Summer already knows what he's saying.
Yes.
It's very nature focused, but it's also Winterfell focused. But as the chapter goes on, you feel the idea of him being connected to the old gods and the children of the forest and like the real North, not just Winterfell, but everything.
Yeah.
All the forests, all the animals, that comes through much stronger, whereas a lot of the other characters are more focused on the worldly part of being a Northerner, being a Stark of Winterfell, being a vassal to King Robert. Bran has a very different connection.
It reminds me, like, the whole chapter as a whole, and even this King Bran thing with him being related to the castle. It reminds me a lot of Memory, Sorrow, and Thorn, and specifically Simon or Siomen, or whatever you want to call him, from Memory, Sorrow, and Thorn. First of all, you should definitely read Memory, Sorrow, and Thorn. I feel like it was George's primary inspiration for A Song of Ice and Fire. I mean, he has a lot of inspirations for A Song of Ice and Fire, but he has said as much, like, he was inspired by Memory, Sorrow, and Thorn. But I definitely think this chapter was inspired by Simon. He was also a boy that, like, climbed castle walls like an ape and would get himself into troubles that no one else knew existed, and he would, like, discover secrets. So he climbed Green Angel Tower in the very beginning of the books, and Green Angel Tower is like a ancient tower that was built by the Children of the Forest type race, and he spies on people talking, and that conversation will be a plot point going forward. Green Angel Tower and kingship and Simon and Memory, Sorrow, and Thorn, it all comes together at the end of Memory, Sorrow, and Thorn, as I think it will in A Song of Ice and Fire. I don't want to spoil you guys. So I see a lot of that stuff in this chapter. Like, there are so many different plot points of A Song of Ice and Fire, and one of the big ones peeks its head out in this chapter. Bran 2.
Boy, that just sounds dead on. That just sounds exactly like this chapter. Like, that's exactly what happens.
Yes. And that's exactly what happened in Memory, Sorrow, and Thorn.
Interesting.
But Bran's climbing, right? In the illustrated books, it looks like he's flying.
Yes.
Which goes in hand in hand with his future.
Fly or die, as some three-eyed raven or crow will tell him shortly.
You know what I also think is interesting is that Bran is afraid of the Hartree.
Yeah, he runs around it. He doesn't want to be seen.
The Hartree had always frightened him. Trees ought not have eyes, Bran thought, or leaves that look like hands. So considering that he will eventually be using the eyes of that Weirwood and be a part of the Weirwood in a sense, I find it odd that he's afraid of it. But I guess the only time you can be brave is when you're afraid.
It all comes back around. I was thinking about that too. I read that back. I'm like, why would Bran be afraid of this? Because he's not afraid of the crypts. He likes scary stories. Like, why is this tree freaking him out? Well, knowing what you know about him in the future, and that he is such a powerful skin changer, that he's the one that is apparently showing connections to his dire wolf, the strongest and the first. Maybe he has some idea that it's not just a tree, like how Ned treats it. He treats it essentially like a statue that he just sits at the bottom of, and he cleans his sword. Bran may have a conception somewhere deep in his head that the tree is actually alive and watching him, that it's not just in his head, that it's real, that maybe Bloodraven or other green seers or even himself in the future are watching and do physically see him when he walks by. That would make some sort of connection sense.
Yeah, I think it's interesting that he's afraid of it. And I think it probably is more like he senses it watching him. Just like he senses, that he thinks Summer understands every word that he says. Mm-hmm. It's sort of like that. And another thing that's interesting about Bran in this chapter is that all of the Stark children have named their direwolves, and Bran hasn't. And they've had them for like 2 months at least, because it takes Robert at least a month to get from King's Landing to Winterfell at the least. So I would say they've had him about 2 months, and Bran hasn't named his. So he says that he tried like 100 names and like none of them were good. I mean, maybe that's a nod at like how important and sentimental and meaningful like Bran Stark takes things, or maybe there's something else going on. I've never really known what to make of it.
So I had a couple thoughts while I was reading. The first one is that when you look at the names the other kids gave them, they are more emblematic of their personalities. So you think about Jon, he names it Ghost, and that's often how Jon feels. He feels like a ghost in Winterfell, that he's like an outsider, that he barely exists. Sansa named hers Lady, and that's how she sees herself. Arya names it Nymeria, a person she looks very much up to, would like to be that kind of warrior, queen, princess sort of character. Robb names his Grey Wind, which has some sort of idea behind it of like speed and battle and those kind of things. Rickon just names him Shaggy Dog. These are, except for Rickon, the other ones are more naming the wolves as a reflection of themselves. But it seems like Bran is having trouble naming Summer because he doesn't know what he really wants. He doesn't know what his identity is. He's such an outsider. Like he wants, like I was saying earlier, he wants to be a Knight of the King's Guard. He'd like to go on the Night's Watch, but then he also would like to stay in Winterfell. He'd also like to be Bran Stark, and these conflicting ideas. Even his little nod where he's thinking about how Robb doesn't know Winterfell how I will. That is a comparison. Like maybe I should be the Lord of Winterfell. There's a lot of confusion in Bran in this chapter, and I think part of that is why he's struggling to name Summer. Well, when we know he eventually does name him Summer, it's what does Bran think of himself? What would be a good reflection? Because of the internal contradictions he has. But the second one was also maybe a more mystical one.
Yeah.
So Bran has as we talked about, in the chapter, George is showing off that Bran and Summer, as he would eventually become named, have this connection. He's hinting at the warging between them. It may be that Bran is trying to think of a good name for Summer, and he's trying to find like maybe the idea of a true name, maybe the name that Summer would give itself, or maybe, as he said, that he feels like Summer understands every word. Maybe Summer's rejecting them. maybe Summer's like, that's not me, that's not me, that's not me.
Yeah, that's possible. But the fact that after that coma dream, I know that's a little far, when he wakes up, that he names his direwolf Summer, makes me think like Bran knows, I'm going to face winter. I'm going to kill winter and bring the summer. So I like that. But, another, like he says that Arya named her wolf after a witch queen. Yeah. I don't recall any stories being related to Nymeria that have to do with witches. So, I'm wondering, is there something out there about Nymeria that we don't know?
Well, there's the idea of the Rhoynar being water wizards. So, I guess in that kind of way, I think it's more that this is telling on Bran that he's only listening to the cool stories about the males, and Arya's listening to the cool stories about females.
Oh. Well, that makes sense.
Like, why would he care about Nymeria of Dorne when he has Arthur Dayne to look up to, and Ryam Redwine, and all these other heroic figures that he could actually end up being like, I guess.
Yeah.
That would be my conception.
Yeah, that's probably accurate. It's interesting, right, that Bran, when he's walking around Winterfell to say his goodbyes, he can't find Jon, and he thinks that Jon is mad at him.
It's not only that he thinks he's mad at him, he thinks Jon's mad at everybody, and Bran doesn't get why. And specifically, he's like, well, he's going to go to the Wall with Uncle Benjen. I mean, isn't that a great time? Like, why is that a bad thing? And we were talking about how, in some ways in this chapter, Bran acts like an adult, that he's very emotionally mature. In this moment, complete swing and whiff. I also find it fascinating that Bran has trouble understanding why Jon would feel like an outsider and angered everybody, when he previously just listed off everybody that went on the hunt. Like, not only was it all the Starks and Jory, but it was Theon Greyjoy, a literal hostage, and Tyrion Lannister, who everyone hates, and Jon gets left behind. It's like, Bran, make those connections. Jon's being labeled as lower than Theon and Tyrion, which is something to say in this society.
Yeah, and just like Bran is going through these experiences with saying his goodbyes, Jon is leaving his home too, and Winterfell is really important to Jon too.
It's massively important. He feels super connected to it, but also an outsider, which you'd think Bran would have some conception of. Like, that should be something that they should bond over, but instead it's Jon and Arya that have that connection.
I mean, Jon and Bran do have a connection, but it's not the same as the one that Jon has with Arya, because Arya is an outsider as well. Even though she's not a bastard, she's still an outsider, and she has felt like she was a bastard.
Yeah, that's true. And
she gets Jon.
You can also probably see it from Jon's perspective. Like, he's really jealous of Robb and his position to be the future Lord of Winterfell. Maybe some part of that also spills over onto Bran, the trueborn versus the bastard thing, and also that even if Robb unfortunately dies, it still won't go to Jon. There's still Rickon and Bran in front of him, and I doubt that just goes away because they're little kids. It's some sort of lingering resentment in the back of his head.
But like we were saying, how Sansa has the stories of things, and Bran has like the stories of knights, and they all like take old Nan's stories as like canon, and the songs as canon. They all do. But Bran and Jon both think the Night's Watch is like a fairy tale. I don't know, like honorable. They just don't understand it. And Jon won't understand it.
Neither of them really get the Night's Watch. Neither of them understand that the penal colony, how there's no honor to be found. Interesting that there's also such a age gap between them, that Jon has not been cured of that, although I guess who would tell him otherwise. But they also share kind of ambitions. Jon thinks about similar sorts of heroic figures, although he sees himself more as Daeron the Young Dragon, less a servant. But even still, Jon thinks about how far he can rise in the world, the bastard, and how far Bran can rise in the world being a second son. There's some overlap there in the stories and characters they seem to like, and a similar naive approach to them that George beats out of them as mercilessly as he can.
This is so funny. Jon sees himself as a Targaryen. Yep. A Targaryen, the dragon.
Daeron the Young Dragon.
The young dragon. The young dragon. And Bran sees himself as being a knight, a protector of the realm, a protector of the weak, defender of the small. So, if he is like this Weirwood king that is going to restore all good to Westeros, like, what does that say about what he sees himself as? Like, someone that's going to be a hero, a protector, like, defend the weak. I think that might be some foreshadowing there.
Could also be misinterpreted, perhaps, in that Bran very much wants to see himself as this great person. He wants to see himself as somebody everyone looks up to, and it's the old the road to hell is paved with good intentions.
So, for the record, do you think King Bran is evil?
I don't know if he's evil, but wow, voice crack. Wow. I can't believe that just happened. I'm 33. I don't know if he's evil, but I do know that if he wants to go from in a cave beyond the wall in a weirwood tree to the acknowledged king of the Seven Kingdoms, he's going to have to enable some pretty horrific shit to make that happen.
Okay. And that brings me to season 8. And we're just going to talk about it for real quick. If Bran knew that Daenerys was going to ignite the entire city of King's Landing, and he put up not one fight or fuss to try to stop it, let it happen, and then traveled all this way to become King Bran, then I think King Bran is evil.
Well, he certainly has the...
But I also don't believe in Season 8.
Well, if even some version of that comes true, he definitely has the blood of King's Landing on his hands, as much or maybe more than Daenerys.
Yeah. Good. That's good. That's good. I got you on record saying that.
I always thought that, Gray. I always thought that the only way to get to the Iron Throne, to get to that place, is to kill a lot of people and do some pretty morally onerous things. And...
yeah, well, that was the plan for Jaime.
Yes.
That was George's initial plan, was Jaime would, kill everybody that comes in front of him to get the throne.
Yeah, you sell your soul to get the throne, essentially. That is true for everybody that has gotten there.
So it's like a long journey to get from this boy Bran, this loving, charming, curious, playful boy, to where he's gonna go and how he's gonna get there. And Obsidian Knights will be down for the ride.
Like we're talking about, there's foreshadowing here for a lot of King Bran, and maybe that's where he's going to end up going. And there's a lot of foreshadowing for Daenerys and where she's going to end up going. But you start this story, though, where Bran is and where Daenerys is, it's a real mindfuck that they actually managed to go from these desperate, as far from the throne as you could be situations, to actually ending up monarchs in some sense. That is a long trip.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. It's a journey, and it's a very intricate journey. There's a lot going on. It's on 2 different continents. It's a massive story, which I feel like is probably why it takes George so long to write. I can't wait for Winds of Winter. I was gonna say you have no idea, but I'm sure you have an idea.
I have some idea.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure. So before Bran takes off climbing, he looks down at Summer. So he runs around, climbs up a tree, and he's jumping from building to building. But before he pauses, and he looks down at Summer, and Summer is looking at Bran, and Bran stares at Summer right in his eyes. And Bran just gets a chill through him. And then when Bran turns and starts climbing again, Summer is howling. So I almost feel like Summer is trying to warn Bran. Summer somehow knows something's about to happen.
Yeah, I got that feeling too when I was reading it back. He started howling when Bran started climbing too. He was like, don't go, don't go, don't go. Locks eyes, makes a silent plea to him, don't go. He disappears onto the roof, and Summer is pissed. I don't remember anything about that. That Summer normally howls when Bran goes climbing. He even seems a little surprised about it. It's unusual.
Yeah,
it would be like ghost. It would be like ghost howling. It's something weird.
Yeah, and he says it. He says it shut up. You're worse than Mother.
Yeah, that's stop badgering me. I would not be surprised with how strange the direwolves are and how they seem tuned into magic themselves, that maybe Summer has some conception that this is a moment of destiny, in the same way that everyone is seeing Daenerys hatch her dragons. I've made a theory about that Daenerys hatching her 3 dragons echoed throughout history, and that the Targaryens were continually trying to make that vision come true. Well, Bran's such an important figure too. Maybe this pivotal moment in his life also sort of ripples out through the magical world and time itself of A Song of Ice and Fire. I mean, that seems to be an idea George would be playing with. It would be interesting if Summer was not only aware of it, but would want to stop him. Because a lot of people have this conception that the direwolves are essentially Bloodraven's pawns, that they do what he wants in order to steer the Stark children to where he wants them to go. That he uses them as to lead them by the nose around the world. But if that's true, then Bloodraven would be... why would he be wanting to stop what was about to happen when it so clearly goes into his plans? I think this moment tells you that whatever is going on with the direwolves is separate from what Bloodraven's doing.
I wonder though, like, if does Bran really have to fall and not walk to become a three-eyed raven? Because Brynden Rivers, he wasn't a cripple. So maybe he doesn't necessarily have to fall for this to happen.
That may be Bran's destiny that he ends up there anyway, but maybe it won't happen in time. Like, there's a time crunch going on.
Yeah.
Like, Brynden Rivers didn't go there until he was elderly. He was like his 60s or 70s when he got sent to the wall. Like, they don't have time for that. Nobody has decades to wait for Bran.
Yeah, but Brynden Rivers was doing weird shit before he went to the wall. He was, he was doing weird, three-eyed ravenish type of things before he disappeared beyond the wall.
That's true, and Bran's kind of doing that here. I actually was reading this out, and I remember talking to Aziz of History of Westeros on a Bloodraven stream, and we were thinking, like, what do you think Bloodraven was like as a kid? Like, when he grew up to be a spy master, when he grew up to be so tuned into the old gods. Like, I was reading this chapter back, I'm like, what if this is what it was like? Like, what if Bloodraven was running around the passages of the Red Keep, jumping onto the roof, climbing the places he shouldn't be, like, getting in touch with birds like Bran is, and it's like, maybe this is supposed to be kind of a parallel, that eventually that would have been the path of Bran, but maybe the children couldn't wait that long.
I swear to God, if we get, like, a Bran in the cave and Brynden Rivers tells him, when I was a boy, I used to run around the Red Keep and go through all the hidden passageways, I will be mind blown, and I will tweet the hell out of this podcast.
Well, I think he definitely was, because he was a spy master, and we know that's how Varys operates. He has little birds all throughout the castles. He knows every passage. You got to figure Bloodraven was doing the same thing.
Yeah, he definitely probably was. So
he definitely probably was. Yeah,
yeah, he definitely probably was. Like, I could see it now, or at Raventree Hall.
Definitely
somewhere he was doing something. So, like, it's no secret, like, Catelyn hates that Bran climbs. And there's, like, this joke that Bran climbed before he walked. And they did the whole clay boy, like, Maester Luwin made a boy out of clay and threw him out of the window to show Bran what would happen to him. And he had stopped climbing for a while, but, like, he couldn't help himself. And when Lord Stark found out, Eddard Stark, he had punished Bran and sent him in the Godswood. And Bran just climbs a tree and fell asleep in the tree. I think, like, Ned thought it was funny. Ned's like, you're not my kid. You can't be a kid of mine. But I just think it's funny because Bran is he's gonna be the person in the story that's most connected to trees, and that he falls asleep at the top of one. I just feel like King Weirwood is just screaming King Weirwood to me.
I heard that loud and clear throughout this chapter. King Weirwood, king of the old gods, king of the children. Even the idea of Ned, he calls him a squirrel. Well, that's what the old name for the children were. The first man called them, like, squirrels, basically, because they were always climbing through the trees and acting like that. It's like, dead on, George. You worked this chapter out for many, many books.
But I've never, like, picked up on that King Bran stuff prior. Like, I always knew Bran would be important, and I thought, like, his importance would be against the others, but I never thought he would be king. So going back and rereading it with knowing that George allegedly told D&D this, and that's why we got King Bran, it's been kind of eye-opening, to be honest.
Yeah, it's kind of like when you read the books for the first time and then you learn about RLJ and you go back and read it and it's like, holy shit, this is everywhere. It's like the same kind of thing.
So how canon do you think the name Bran the Broken is? Before I get into this part, I want to ask you how canon you think Bran the Broken. We both agree King Bran is canon, is book canon, but how canon is the name Bran the Broken?
I'm guessing it will be Bran the Blessed, like the I think it's the Celtic myth.
Yeah.
Right? I think that's probably the way it will go, especially because I'm guessing that in the books that George is going to play up the idea of the first old god king of Westeros since like Garth Greenhand. Mm-hmm. So that'll probably be a big part of it. Although, which I think will be kind of funny. Maybe the old god adherents will call him Bran the Blessed. I wonder what the Faith of the Seven adherents will call him.
Yeah. So I was thinking Bran the Broken may be more canon than we think, or maybe may have the possibility of being canon, because I started to think, like, in this chapter, Maester Luwin throws out that clay boy, the clay boy breaks, and then Bran says that his favorite place is the Broken Tower, and there's nothing in the Broken Tower but the crows, the birds, and an ancient owl, and Bran knows them all. And Bran is basically in the Broken Tower when he goes to the first keep and is pushed from the window. So I don't know, and then he becomes broken himself. But there's also like a quote in A Clash of Kings where he's like, Winterfell is like me, it's just broken. It's not destroyed, or something like that. And he talks about like the roots of the weirwoods go deep, and the kings sit on their cold thrones or their dead thrones or something. It's one of my favorite quotes. I'm surprised I don't have it memorized, but I don't know. Like, this chapter made me think, what if it is gonna be Bran the Broken?
I guess it could be. There's good alliteration with Bran and Broken. It's one of those things that's hard to know if George will keep that, if that's what he's intending going forwards, because so much of this first book got like totally retconned later. My favorite one is the idea that Catelyn was supposed to die beyond the wall and to the others, and that one didn't end up happening. She ended up becoming Lady Stoneheart, who reused it. But I don't know. It's one of those things where George has totally left himself open for what he will use this name for. Like, for instance, he has definitely not revealed what Jon's true name is, although Aegon's probably correct. Like, he's been dropping hints everywhere.
Aegon is correct. I don't think it's correct. I feel, okay. Why would Rhaegar name both of his sons Aegon?
You never heard of George Foreman?
No, I have heard of George Foreman, but like, why would Rhaegar do that?
I don't know. He's a weird guy. He's playing harps in Summerhall. He's kidnapping princesses. Who knows? Right.
So George does do that, though. Like, I was reading some article where he was like talking about when you write books, like the normal person that authors a story, like they don't name the people similar names. Even like similar letters. So like you wouldn't have a Bran, a Brandon, and a Bradley. Like that you would make it completely different. And George does this shit where he not only names people the same names, he has like 5 people with the same names. But I just feel like Aegon, if you already have one Aegon that's going to be king, why do you have I don't know. Maybe it's like where Rhaenyra has a son named Aegon, and they call him Aegon the Younger, and then they have Aegon the Second, which is her brother. I don't know. I just always thought it would be not Aegon since we already have one. But
they could also be Aegon the Sixth and Aegon the Seventh. Like, you could also give them like weird little nicknames. Like, you'd just be like, especially when you're talking about royal names. A lot of like throughout history, quite a lot of monarchs would have what they would call a royal name. You hear this with like the popes. When you become a pope, they take a name that's different from their own one. Yeah. So like whatever his quote unquote true Targaryen name is, with probably like 15 middle names, because that's how royals work. That's not going to be his actual name. He still always will be Jon.
Yeah, they do that in England a lot.
Yeah.
A lot of Henrys, a lot of Charles,
a lot of Georges.
Yeah. So, Bran.
Yeah.
Sorry, we went on a tangent. So, Bran eavesdrops on some pretty valuable information. So, we saw in Catelyn 2 that Lysa Tully sent Catelyn a secret letter. And this conversation that Bran is listening to seems to be validating some of that letter. Because the Queen does not love Eddard Stark. She's afraid and uncomfortable that Ned Stark has accepted the handship. And she actually thought that he wouldn't take it. Like he shouldn't have took it, in my opinion. He should have stayed in Winterfell, but then, like as we said in the beginning, we wouldn't have a story.
Yeah.
But we get a feel of Cersei and Jaime, and we get more than a feel.
Yeah, there's some feeling going on in this in this whole scene, and some awesome descriptions of George from Noise's awesome stuff. Yeah, we see full Cersei being paranoid mode here. She is reading 15 steps too far into what Ned's actually doing. Although I guess she does correctly nail that Lysa has warned the Starks, but has not warned them in the particulars of what exactly happened.
Yeah, so I think Cersei is concerned that Jon Arryn might have told Lysa that her children are bastards. And that's not the case. So, but, you know what's interesting? Like, Cersei is actually, for all...
She's right.
She's right. And...
She is right.
She is politically savvy when she's not sabotaging herself. But she picks up, that she's like, why would he accept it? And we know that he wasn't going to accept it. And the only reason that he accepted it is because he fears that Robert is in danger and he wants to get to the bottom of what happened to Jon Arryn. Now, Jaime is like, there's 100 reasons he could have accepted it. Duty, honor, he yearns to write his name large across the books of history, to get away from his wife, or both. Oh, and he also says maybe he wants to get warm once in his lifetime. But we know, that's not Eddard Stark. That's not who he is. He doesn't care about his name being written across any history books. It's mainly he's going because he feels like it's his duty to protect Robert and find out what happened to Jon Arryn.
I do find it interesting that I don't think we've ever heard of a situation where Cersei and Ned got to know each other. And Jaime has actually had some interactions with Ned, notably in the throne room after he killed Aerys. And it's Jaime who's figuring him wrong and Cersei who's got it right. It's very interesting to me that Cersei absolutely gets his intentions.
Yeah.
How did that happen? I think it was just a plot convenience that George needed the paranoia to come out. But yeah,
because she's smart.
She is smart. It's also interesting seeing the difference in their personality, where Cersei is trying to think in the high political world and think about, she brings up that she thinks she's going to be replaced, which ends up being a plot point. We do know that Renly was trying to do that. He's trying to get Robert to marry Marjorie instead. And Jaime's like, don't worry about it. Let's go to Bone Town.
Yeah. Jaime doesn't take anything serious. And we will learn that as we go forward. Jaime doesn't care at all. But I picked this up on my reread. She said that it's a wonder Lysa was not here to greet us with her accusations. So has Lysa made accusations? Or is she assuming that she has?
I think
to
Cersei's
Cersei.
assuming it. I don't think... As far as I remember, after Jon Arryn dies, Lysa takes Sweet Robin and then runs back to the Eyrie. I'm guessing... Well, we know that Cersei thinks that she did this in order to protect herself because she thinks herself and her son are in danger. It's interesting, though, that she thinks that Lysa would go to Winterfell with the accusations with the intention of arresting Jaime and Cersei as soon as the royal party arrives. She was expecting a trial.
Wow. I didn't realize that.
Well, if Lysa's there with her accusations, if you're accusing her of murder, then that's obviously the Cersei and Jaime and any of the other Lannisters may end up with their heads on spikes. That's kind of an interesting window into Cersei's world, where she's absolutely right about some things, but this level of paranoia that Lysa was out to get her and had this whole big plan and was going to have like Ilan Payne there to take off her head is interesting.
Yeah.
And George makes this more explicit in A Feast for Crows, and how she's almost right and then she goes too far. That's what this was. She's right, Lysa has something out to get her, but goes too far with maybe what's the right word for it? Maybe projecting what she would do in Lysa's situation onto Lysa.
Yeah. And I think Cersei, for the most part, is smart. And because she is a woman in this story, she doesn't get a lot of credit for being as smart as she is. I mean, she does a lot of stupid shit as well. And most of it is out of paranoia. But in a Game of Thrones, she isn't nearly as paranoid as she is, like, in A Feast for Crows. So I think Cersei's political mind is showing really early on in the Bran chapters. And Jaime is like, you should be thankful, you know, be glad it's Eddard Stark and not Renly or Stannis. And
True.
I've always thought Robert should have named Stannis as his hand. Always thought
Stannis
that.
agrees with you. Stannis very much agrees.
Because they're so afraid of him, and the reason they're afraid of him is because they know they couldn't get away with the shit they're going to get away with Ned Stark.
Yeah, but it's also, I think there's also the fact that Stannis, after Jon Arryn's death, left the capital, so it probably would have been hard to name him.
Yeah.
Like, Robert probably would have felt abandoned by that action. Like, this is the time of greatest need, and it's like Stannis is like, peace, off to Dragonstone.
Yeah, I can't believe he left his brother high and dry like that, but I also, you know, we won't get into that. We'll let the Stannis propaganda happen on Not a Cast.
Oh, there's a lot of propaganda about Stannis on that cast, let me tell you something. I wanted to ask you what you made of Bran's, I guess, his gymnastics and his skills. Like, I read this chapter and how he's swinging from gargoyle to gargoyle, hand over hand, and he's climbing up, like, flat walls, and he's memorized where exactly he needs to go. And it was one of those things where I was like, George, what would Bran's life have been like if you hadn't had him shoved out? Like, where was he going with this?
Right. He was a skilled climber. Maybe
Amazing dexterity.
Maybe when he was at the Red Keep, he would have been climbing around the Red Keep, eavesdropping. He'd have been a new spider, like a Varys type of creature. And you know, this scene where Bran is spying on Jaime and Cersei, it kind of reminds me of that Arya chapter when she, kind of finds out Illyrio and Varys are planning in the dungeons, and she goes back to Ned, and she can tell him a little bit, but she doesn't know, like, nothing she's saying is really making sense.
Yeah, it's an adult conversation and doesn't quite grasp it.
Right, which is kind of like what's going on here with Bran. Like, Bran just thinks they're wrestling. Like, he thinks they're wrestling, and he thinks that, Jaime's hand between Cersei's legs is hurting her. Like, he doesn't know he's 7. He doesn't know what the fuck is going on. Just like, it's an adult thing happening. He doesn't know. And he will never get to tell anybody what happened because he's gonna be pushed out of the window. So basically, Cersei sees Bran watching them. And
how does she see him? How does that happen?
I don't know.
Because he's hanging there, and he's not making any noise, and then Cersei looks up, locks eyes, and there's the line where it says, he says, I must have made a noise. But he didn't. And it's the same kind of weird shit happened with Jon and Ghost, where Jon thinks he heard a noise. In his conception, he heard Ghost essentially yelp. Nobody else heard him. Right. And in this situation, the same kind of thing happens where it appears that Cersei heard something that nobody else in the room did.
The three-eyed raven.
Maybe. That may have been a little bit of a help.
Yeah, to force destiny to happen.
Like we were talking about how Summer didn't want this to happen. Seems Bloodraven did.
Yes. Okay, so Jaime grabs Bran and asks Bran how old he is. Bran says, I'm 7. He says, the things I do for love with loathing, and he gave Bran a shove. Screaming, Bran went backward out the window into empty air. There was nothing to grab onto. The courtyard rushed up to meet him. Somewhere off in the distance, a wolf was howling. Crows circled the broken tower, waiting for corn. So, I mean, okay. So, first of all, Jaime saying the things that he does for love. So, Jaime, rightfully so, gets a lot of shit for pushing Bran out the window. Now, in the big scheme of things, if Bran tells what he saw, every single person Jaime knows is going to be dead. Tywin, Joffrey, Cersei, Tyrion, every single Lannister will die.
And probably a civil war.
And a war. So, I mean, of course it's the wrong thing to push Bran out the window. But in this big overall picture, like, it's a hard choice to make, I guess. What is the cost? What's the cost?
You can rationalize it.
What's the cost of one life next to the cost of a kingdom? Or what is that they use to justify killing Edric when they want to kill him?
Yes, Stannis and they'll make the argument that what is one boy's life against the kingdom? Yeah.
Yeah. So, one boy's life against the kingdom, in the words of Davos, is everything. It means everything. And while I think that Bran had to get pushed out of the window in order to fulfill his destiny, I still think it's fucked up. And I think that's why this bad thing, like, we've just watched this whole chapter, this playful boy struggling with saying goodbye to his home, this 7-year-old, and then we, like, our first real interaction with the Jaime is him flinging Bran from a window.
It is something else. Like, just on a side note, Jaime, maybe don't fuck your sister, the queen, so you don't put yourself in a situation where you may have to kill somebody to keep that secret. Like,
yeah,
maybe don't do those things.
Yeah.
But anyway, like you were saying, I did find this very interesting on the reread, that I know in the show version that Jaime just kind of shoves Bran, but in this one, Bran is hanging from one hand. He has fallen because I think he was like hanging upside down or something like that. He falls, or no, he was. Okay, I'm sorry. He was above the window, falls, and grasps onto the windowsill with one arm. The other, he's hanging on by his fingertips. Jaime goes over, tells him to take his arm, pulls him up to the point that Bran notices that there's like marks on Jaime's arm from how tightly he was gripping. So he saves Bran, and then he asks him his age, and then he shoves him out the window. Like, he didn't have to do that. He could have just like slapped his hand or pushed him in the face and pushed him off. Like, he was thinking about letting him go. He was thinking about mercy.
Yeah. And
then decided, no, I guess maybe the age thing. He was like, he's too old. He'll understand too much of what he saw. I think this is the argument that Jaime and Cersei have later.
Yeah.
Basically, that Jaime reasons, crap, he's too old, I gotta kill him. But I don't know, that he was willing to show even a little bit of mercy to Bran, that he was considering not killing him.
Later, Cersei kind of says, I didn't want you to kill him. And I might be misremembering, so correct me if I'm wrong.
No, you're right.
Okay.
Cersei's like, that was fucked up.
Yeah, Cersei's like, I didn't want you to kill him, that whatever. But Jaime is kind of like, whoa, what was I supposed to do? But in this chapter, like, Cersei, well, what did Cersei want Jaime to do? because I think Cersei says, like, you know, we could have scared him or whatever, but she's like, he saw us. So what did she want? Like, she never said anything. She never said, you know,
no, don't do it. No.
Yeah.
Let's work this out. She just says, like, oh no, he saw us. And Jaime's like, all right, well, I guess I gotta shove this kid out a window.
Yeah, but I mean, so Bran falls out the window, and somewhere off in the distance, a wolf was howling, and crows were circling the broken tower. So Bran had to go, when he would go up the broken tower, he would feed the crows and the birds and the owls, and they wanted corn. And the wolf that's howling off in the distance is more than likely, almost 100%, Summer.
It's especially when we know about Bran's future, the idea of the wolf howling, probably like, oh no, Bran's in trouble, and then the crows overhead that are looking for food. And since we know Bloodraven essentially takes Bran and gives him to the trees and is kind of like harvesting him for his powers, sort of, it seems like. It's the crows seem pretty excited about their meal, whereas the wolves are not so psyched. Tells us a little something about maybe who's upset and who's not that Bran just fell.
Yeah, but with the crows, Bloodraven is, or with the crows, the three-eyed raven is excited, and Summer is not, which Summer tried to stop Bran from going up the walls. And that is basically Bran too. There's a lot going on in that chapter. Is there anything you want to add?
I think at the end of it, there's obviously a lot of information being given here, and it's important for a plot reason that Jaime shoving Bran sets so much in the future in motion. It really exacerbates the situation that leads to the War of the Five Kings. But when you go back and read it from Bran's perspective and how he compares himself to other people, how he likes being an observer, not really a part of them, how he has this connection to nature and summer and feels scared of the Weirwoods and has this odd connection with the birds, especially with his comparison between himself and Robb, that he would know Winterfell in a way Robb never could. George is, in the second chapter, making the case for this, like, God King, Weirwood King Bran already, that he has a connection to this world that none of the other actual lords and kings can ever compare to. He is separate, he is different, and he is what am I trying to say? And it appears he's being groomed for a very different life than just a Kingsguard. Yeah,
and just a boy climbing castle walls. And just to, like, go back on the closeness of Winterfell thing and the King Bran thing, I really feel like there is some foreshadowing that something's going to go down in the Winds of Winter at Winterfell. And Bran, nobody knows Winterfell like Bran. Like, Bran knows in this chapter, Bran knows secrets and bridges and things that connect, and the ground isn't leveled. Like, we get a lot of Winterfell. I feel like we get the most Winterfell exposition, like, just about Winterfell in this chapter. Like, the building, the castle.
Except for the crypts.
Yeah.
There are other chapters for the crypts, but yeah, the rest of the castle, Bran gives us the look into the soul of the building.
Yeah. And his chapters going forward will give us a lot about Winterfell.
Very true.
So yeah, Bran's connected to Winterfell, and King Bran. This chapter was littered with King Bran, and it had a lot of that Simon Memory, Sorrow and Thorn. So if you haven't read Memory, Sorrow and Thorn, I really suggest you reading that. But I think that's all. We knocked it out. We covered everything. If you have any questions for us, leave them in the comment section or email them to me if you're listening in podcast form. The email address is obsidiannightspodcast@gmail.com. And do you want to tell the people where they can find you?
Yep. I'll go ahead and reiterate all my titles as people like making fun of me for. I've got my YouTube channel, youtube.com/Joe Magician, the podcast feed, the Wit and Wisdom of Joe Magician. You can also find me on the Maester Monthly podcast, on Twitter at the Joe Magician, at my blog, joemagician.wordpress.com, and you can also find me every Saturday, except for this Saturday because I had to work, mostly every Saturday at 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, do a stream, maybe getting somebody soon to talk about dragons. I don't know who that could be.
Me.
Oh, wait, yeah, it's you. Oh, it's Gray. That's right. On my YouTube channel, we do a 2-hour stream followed by Radio Westeros. They do theirs at 5. And on Tuesdays at 7 p.m., I do my Crusader Kings 2 streams, if you're into that. So, yeah, that is all the things.
I really appreciate you for coming on here with me and talking Bran 2. And as I said, I will be having a different guest every week. We're going to be getting the fandom involved. If you have a podcast, if you have a YouTube channel or a blog, that's okay. But if you don't, that's okay too. We just want to talk. And don't forget, if you want to support Quinn's new graphic novel, Tadia, the link is in the description box. As always, thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. And I will see you next week.